Hello and welcome. We're so glad that you could spend some time with us today. I'm Dr. Michael Fagel-Luby, and we're joined by Dr. Max Engel. This session is about why inclusion isn't coming. It's already here. Catholic schools and inclusive special education. We assume if you're here, you're either interested in this topic or you recognize how much inclusion may already be happening in your schools. We are so pleased to have you join us for this session, part of a continuing strand on a special issue in the Journal of Catholic Education. We hope you'll find our presentation today a way to get to know a little more about what's in that article and maybe answer some questions that you've had as you've looked at it. So thank you again for joining us.
Absolutely. Thanks, Mike. And we want to be clear about our big ideas right out of the gate. Including students with Catholic schools in Catholic schools is more than just a good idea. It fits with our Catholic faith and it's the right thing to do. And our experience tells us that you are likely serving some students with disabilities in your school. And so in this presentation, it's our intent to affirm your efforts, to ground your work in our shared beliefs as Catholic schools, as Catholic educators, Catholic school educators, and to provide you justification to validate your journey, to help you advocate for what you are already doing.
Yeah, it's kind of our hope that for Max and I, we were going to spend a little bit of time with you today. We wanted to share our big idea, but also kind of connect with you, let you know that we've walked some of this journey with you. So maybe without further ado, we'll talk a little bit about, well, ourselves, I guess, right? I was a Catholic school teacher high school teacher in Jacksonville, Florida, Bishop Kenny High School, as part of the ACE program many, many moons ago. I taught both chemistry and English, as well as became an administrator, working with students who were in the most behavioral risk of exiting the school of 1,650 students. I got really interested as a teacher in why was it that students struggled with different ideas. And it turned out, especially from a literacy perspective, that we needed to find ways, I wanted to find ways to enhance my instruction so that high achieving kids were challenged, but also I didn't lose kids. That was so important to me that everybody could come along for the ride and learn this content that I was so passionate about. And I got really lucky. I met some folks at the University of Kansas through some connections with faculty at Notre Dame, where I got to study with some folks who that was exactly what they were focusing on. Teaching or enhancing content area instruction without watering it down and making sure that all kids could play, right? And doesn't that fit with our Catholic identity, that sort of finding a way for all kids to play? So after a number of years of graduate school, I have been a professor at the University of Connecticut, and now I am at Texas Christian University, where I do work in a couple of different ways. First, I think about you if you're a teacher and kids. How do we design instruction to help you be successful with those kiddos? And I think about it within a literacy lens. How do we approach literacy from pretty much 4th grade through 12th grade so kids can make meaning from science texts, English texts, religious texts, whatever it is you're reading? And then where do those kids go? How do we put a support system around you as a teacher so you're not in the last outpost? We want to do that in a way that actually Christy Monfilio and I wrote a companion article to the one that we're talking about today on MTSS. So I sort of think about that so that you're not alone. And ultimately, the post-secondary is, Max, do we want all our kids, right, to head off to school? So if we want that for other kids, and we want it for our own as well. I'm also director of the Alice Neely Special Education Research and Service Institute at TCU and a professor of special education.
I'm Max Engel, and if you take a look, similar connection to Mike, sort of history. I taught Catholic schools in 8 years. I was a coach, I was a theology teacher, I was an English teacher, I was a liturgical director and a retreat coordinator, all of the different hats that many of us wear in Catholic schools. If you look on that screen in the far left, I was an ACE with Mike, the Alliance for Catholic Education, an increasingly long time ago. We were ACE 5, for those of you keeping track. And then in the middle, those middle 2 photos on the top there are my 4 Engel children who are enrolled in Catholic schools. And we are thrilled to have Catholic schools that have put an emphasis on inclusive education for all the students in their schools. And my children don't avail themselves of that services directly, but indirectly, their opportunity to grow and to encounter students who, from a range of backgrounds, have a range of aptitudes and a range of abilities, has really amplified their growth, their experience, their school experience. And for my wife and I as parents in a Catholic school, that means a lot to us. That's important to us. That is part of our Catholic universal school, welcoming all children into our school. that photo in the far upper right for you, I think I have a little goatee there. That's 1998, me teaching way back when, my first class. I had a lot of fun. After 8 years of teaching, I realized I had questions about Catholic identity, Catholic mission. How do we hand on our Catholic tradition? So I did a PhD in religious education and catechetics at the Catholic University of America. And then I've been, since 2013, I've been at Creighton University in Omaha, Nebraska. So I teach in the theology department and I teach in the education department. I go to twice as many department meetings. But it's good. I'm at the intersection of theology and education, and I enjoy that very much. I was the lead author on a book published by NCEA, Your School's Catholic Identity, Name It, Claim It, and Build on It. You can see that little image there. And then I also dabble at the intersection of sport and religion. And so there's a photo there in front of St. John's Church with one of my research colleagues and teaching colleagues. We explore the impact of sports and how does sports interact with what so many families and so many students find as their center of meaning, and that's their athletics and their athletic competition. And what does this have to do with a religious tradition? So that's a little bit about me, a little bit about context, where we're coming to you. So we're excited that you're joining us on this little ride for the next 45 minutes or so.
Yeah, and I think it's so nice to know kind of the special issue article that we're talking about is really informed by those true traditions. I mean, we've been friends for years now, but in particular, it's been so enriching for me to think about your training at this intersection of where religious education and education come together, and mine from special education and general education, where those sort of things fit together because of the view we have of kids, right? Your 4 wonderful kids, mine, but everybody's kids. And how do we get them access to this good stuff? So again, just as a quick reminder, this talk is related to the special issue of JCE. Please check it out. Lots of great authors on there. And one of the unique features of this, by the way, that we'll try and talk about a little bit today is every article in the special issue actually had a practitioner, a respondent, read the article and then write back, so that it wasn't like Max and I were just making this stuff up. We actually showed it to folks in the field to say, what do you think? Is this your experience too? Ahead of time. And they actually wrote a response. So please go check that out. So where are we going today? We thought, right, without being able to be with you, which is kind of heart-wrenching, right? This COVID thing is keeping us from each other, although it at least allows Max and I to do this and hopefully reach out to you. We'll give you our email addresses at the end, and hopefully you'll reach out to us. But these are the things, without being with you, we thought might be valuable to take from the article. First is, when you're thinking about including kids with disabilities, there's a foundation in what we do and who we are. Catholic social teaching certainly does that for us and connects directly to the mission of Catholic schools. And Max is going to talk a little bit about that here in just a second. And then I want to talk a little bit about a continuum of models of inclusion and sort of how do we get our mindset around offering students the least restrictive environment for them to be successful. And I think that's a powerful shift in framework that I hope you'll be able to embrace and use at your school. And then we thought it would be kind of nice to talk through a big part of the article is debunking 5 critical misconceptions in the field about kids with disabilities, because they're the kinds of things that if you're working with kids with disabilities, you probably hear all the time. We want to give you a way to respond to that. And then if we humbly submit at the end some action steps that if there's some things in here that click for you, that help you wanting to move another step on the continuum of serving kids, there's some action steps you can follow. We'll also stop periodically and offer you some reflection questions. This is all on video, right? So hopefully you'll have a chance to, instead of answering the questions out loud where we can banter back and forth, at least pause the video and engage in some of that good educational self-reflection so that you can have a chance to process this content as well. Max, is that a fair starting point? Should we just take him to the good stuff?
Yeah, sounds good.
All right.
All right. So CST, Catholic Social Teaching, is an inclusive foundation, and it's the line. It's the Catholic Church's best kept secret, and perhaps it's the best kept secret in Catholic schools too. And so part of my intent in the next couple of minutes is to lay out a foundation for what Mike and I talk about throughout this presentation, and then certainly include in that article. It comes out of our Catholic faith. And so, we see an icon of Christ, the teacher, there, and we see St. Peter's there. Kind of what does that mean? And let's start right with what the word Catholic means. And so, that mission that we have, the Catholic Church has a mission that comes out of Matthew 28. And that mission, go therefore and make disciples of all nations. And so the Catholic schools are part of that mission. Like, I always tell, and I work with teachers and administrators, that Catholics, the Catholic Church has a mission, and Catholic schools are part of that mission. Catholic schools don't have a mission. It's not part of that mission. That's part of the Catholic Church's mission. And so foundationally, it's going to evangelize in education, chemistry, biology, physics, whatever topic it is a process of evangelization in a way that I'll make clear here in a bit there. So that's a bit on Catholic, that's a bit on the mission, Matthew 28:19 there. And Catholic schools are part of that mission. So what does the word Catholic mean? If we take a look at that, and it's often universal. And I think it's that line from James Joyce, here comes everybody. And wouldn't that be great if that related to our Catholic schools? Here comes everybody. But it's the universe. It's everybody, but it's all of somebody. It's every aspect. It's not just one's intellectual abilities, it's one's athletic abilities or what have you. It's all of that person. So it's all of everybody for our Catholic education. It's a way of understanding, this is what we are. And we evangelize all of everybody, not just their minds, not just their certain specific abilities, but the mandate is to everyone to encounter and receive everyone in our universe here. So that's a little bit there. And education is a holy work. And I think you as educators, you as administrators who are hearing our voices, I encourage you to think about that. In the incarnation, Jesus divinizes and dignifies what is truly human and was created in the image of God. And so if we go back to Genesis, we are told that we are created in God's image and that we are therefore good. And so education is the lifelong process of being who we're created to be, which is fully human. We are most like the God who created us when we conduct ourselves and we behave in a way that reflects who and what we were created to be. And education helps us do that. Chemistry, biology, learning to read, our phonics, whatever it might be. And everyone is invited to this process. The outset of Mark's gospel, Mark chapter 1, verse 15, the kingdom of God is at hand. And the kingdom of God is at hand for everybody. And that kingdom of God is at hand in our Catholic schools for everybody. That's the mandate that we're striving to get to there.
Max, is it, in Texas, we say, God don't make mistakes, right? We boil it down a little down here. But am I right in saying that's sort of one of the themes of where we're going in our presentation is this idea of, in your first point here, that we are created in this God's image, but we also are variable as human beings. Some of us are particularly good singers, and some of us are good athletes, and some of us are, really good at doing the crossword puzzle. And some of us don't run very fast, and some of us can't do any pull-ups, or I don't know why I'm stuck on that one today. But some of us have disabilities, and yet we are all created in God's image. And in being so, that idea of the doors being open to everybody, how do you think about that? I mean, am I barking up the right tree here of we're all created in God's image, but within that, there's human variability?
Absolutely. And I think that, there's a difference between unity and uniformity. And we're called to be unified. We're not called to be uniform. And there can be a wide range of plurality that can be unified in our mission to be evangelized and evangelizers, which is to live out the gospel, to make God known, loved, and served, and to help our faculties, our students, families to be who God created them to be, and to recognize that in and through the person of Christ teaches us as a role model for how to live as Jesus taught. I mean, that's the message. We're called to be little Christs. That's the etymology of the word Christian, a little Christ. How do we do that? We look at Christ. We want to know what God invites us to be? Look at this guy named Jesus. And we need to be conscious and comfortable using those terms regardless of our school and regardless of our academic area, that we're moving, we can be unified in our mission. We can be very diverse in how we attain that, how we move towards that, and who we are and what gifts we bring to contribute to our communities, both our school communities and the larger community of humankind.
I don't know if the audience is, I'm taking so much from that. This is like I'm going to school. Thank you for that. That's great.
So the children of God, I think that's an image that is deeply embedded throughout Scripture, and it certainly comes to the fore in the Gospels. And so we see a passage from Luke and certainly the Beatitudes from Matthew, just calling us, if we're not challenged by the Gospels, if we're not challenged by the Beatitudes, I think we're probably not paying close enough attention. And as educators, blessed are the poor in spirit. Like, wait a minute. What does that mean for me as a teacher? The working with students who come from, spiritually, financially, perhaps intellectually poorer, coming from a background that isn't as I'm struggling with words here, these euphemisms, Mike. But coming from a position of need, coming from a position of
well, the word we would use is difference, right? And I think we're going to talk a little bit about different ways, perspectives we have on disability. And I think it's honest. I love the way you're struggling with that because we all do, right? We try and wrap words around. Like when I have a kid who I want to teach how to read and they're struggling to read, like that's honestly, it's both a source of frustration, but it's also part of what I'm called to do. Like the kid who picked up the book and started reading. I mean, I'm thinking of you and I both have daughters who get in trouble for walking up and down the stairs while reading, right? Because we're just like, be careful, but reading is there for them. But there's some kids who that's not the case for. And that difference is the thing we're called to help if it's getting in the way for them in some way of fulfilling this potential you talked about so beautifully earlier. So I think it's a great way to talk about it, sort of honest in how we struggle with those terms. So
yeah, this is evidence that we did not rehearse our presentation.
No.
But in this image here on the screen is the Apostle Paul, self-proclaimed apostle there. I can see his hands are up and he's lecturing the, perhaps the Corinthians or the Galatians or whomever it is that he's writing there. This is not new news. Like Paul was dealing with stubborn populaces, and so do you as teachers, and so do you as administrators. And that analogy that Paul uses in 1 Corinthians about the body gets back to what I alluded to earlier about our, uniformity is not unity. Plurality, we can be uniform with different gifts. And he uses that analogy of a body. The wrist can't say to the nose, to the hand, to the ear, to the eye. We're all in this together, and we need everybody to be a full community as we're created to be. And so sometimes we have this notion that back in the apostolic age that everyone was singing Kumbaya together. And all of my training convinces me that was not the case. When Paul is upset and he's directing pointed language, it's because there are real issues that he is addressing. And those issues that he was addressing are very much the same issues that you are addressing in your classes today, in your schools today. So,
and I love that idea that, again, the nose, the arm, that you remind us that even amongst our body, it's many different things. And that's, again, these are the themes of plurality and variability for us.
We get to a little bit of Catholic anthropology. If God is love, it's very explicit in the first letter of John, then if God is love and we're created in the image of that God, then who and what we are created to do and be is to love others in a self-giving way. And so God's very self can be imaged as a relationship, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. And that's not Engel coming at you. That's Augustine. And we can claim that.
Only slightly less well known.
Sure. But it's, Saint Augustine explained God's the love, the beloved, and the beloved, the lover, the beloved, and the love that's shared between them. And that necessitates community, and that necessitates relationship. And that in relationships bring all of who we are, that the universality, of the Catholicness of everybody, and all of the everybody coming together. And that loving of others is giving of ourselves. And Jesus demonstrated redemptively the gift of self on the cross. And as Christians, as Catholics, we can never lose sight of Jesus gave of himself to humanity. And that is that model that we are invited, challenged to follow as well. And that's our destiny. We are created in that image to be that. That's our anthropology. That's the basis for what Mike and I are doing here.
Yeah, Max, oftentimes, I think we talk about this a little bit in the article, but many times a safe place to respond from as private schools is to say, well, there's federal legislation that says, we're not held to that standard of IDEA. That's for public schools. That's not for us. But what you just reminded me of is how we're called to so much more of a higher standard, like, yes, there is that set of laws that protects all kids, and that's wonderful. In our particular context, though, what you just reminded us, that is so much more to the mission that we are trying to live, the different things we try and live out. So thanks for that. This
Yeah,
is going to be a little bit about sort of where that goes. So yeah, Catholic social teaching.
yeah, sure. That everything, Catholic social teaching flows from a Christology, from a spirituality, from the Gospels, and it's a way of making clear how we live in community with each other. And it's, relationship is always first, and the rules come second. And I think that when you think back to Exodus, in Genesis and Exodus, Yahweh is in relationship with the Israelites first and foremost, and then after that relationship is demonstrated through the Exodus, it's stated and celebrated. And so the Ten Commandments are the bylaws that put in place a relationship that's already existed and it's already been celebrated. And by analogy, Jesus and his disciples, a teacher and students, as teachers and administrators, we need to have rules and parameters. But those rules and parameters flow out of a great love for our students, and we have a relationship first. And so students, we need to make sure that we understand the Catholic social teaching is not a bunch of onerous rules imposed on an outside, from an outside entity. It's we ourselves choose to follow to be our best selves. It's guidelines that help us do what we're created to do and be. An analogy I often use in class with undergrads is a marriage relationship. Are there rules in a marriage? Absolutely. Is it first and foremost? No, it's the relationship. And so Catholic social teaching helps us understand, gives us guidelines to follow for how to be in a relationship with each other. It's a body of work, it's a gift from the church to us, that it's a collection of work that helps us be in relationship.
Max, as I'm listening to this, right, as our audience is listening to this, hopefully there's 2 or 3 of you out there. What you're giving us are these you're strengthening our justifications to make this decision to walk this walk of including kids with disabilities in our Catholic schools. Am I right about that? The sort of
Absolutely.
these ways that you're describing these, in many ways, might be the conversations that we use with our administrators or with our colleagues when they say, well, why would we do this? You're actually laying out the biggest reasons why we would do this. I'm going to get some of the pragmatic stuff, but what you're really getting at is why we're called in our faith to do this. Is that a fair way to think about this?
Yeah, I mean, the why matters. That line, what's your why? And I think too often we in education, we're pragmatists, right? We have limited time, limited energy. We can overlook the why, but it's the why that's our wellspring of who we are, that motivates who we are as individuals and who we are as a community. And we need to be grounded in something. If we're not grounded in something, then we'll fall for anything. And what do we stand for as Catholic educators, as Catholic school educators? And so Catholic social teaching needs to be a part of our why. Why do we do what we do? Let's go to our body of knowledge, our collected wisdom that we know as Catholic social teaching, which interestingly enough includes specific statements on disabilities. The 1978 pastoral statement of the U.S. Catholics on persons with disabilities, and it directly relates to schools, and you can see the quotation there related to providing professional development to meet the needs of all students. And Mike and I were 2 years old when that thing was published. We've come a long way, but this giving away secrets. We've come a long way, but perhaps maybe not. This is not a new recognition. We're hoping that what we provide helps you continue on this journey to provide full inclusion in your schools.
Yeah, Max, we'll have to go back and talk about this sometime. 1978 is when the regulations for IDA came out. It was passed in 1975. PL 94-142, the Education for All Handicapped Children Act, the first piece of sort of federal legislation around education for kids with disabilities. And it's really interesting to see how the church responded to that as well. Clearly, the church is thinking about this at the same time, and that's so encouraging to see.
And the U.S. bishops and the National Catholic Education Association, back in 2013, published the National Standards and Benchmarks, and it outlines, what are measurable, identifiable criteria for an authentically Catholic elementary school and secondary school, and it recognizes clearly the inclusion of students from all abilities, and there should be taken steps to include everyone, and that's based on an earlier document from the US bishops that's quoted there on the screen that you can see from 2005, where the bishops celebrate the increasing number of administrators and teachers who have taken steps to welcome these children with disabilities into their schools. And then the NCAA built on that in 2013. And so we have that as part of like our criteria. Like are we doing it or not? This is part of what it means. And so those national standards and benchmarks are a real resource. I don't propose that they're the end all be all, but they're a solid start for a conversation about what is it that makes us a Catholic school.
What a great document if they don't already have to just kind of do a quick Google and go to and search. That's awesome. Thanks, Max.
And then Pope Francis, I mean, the current pontiff who has really made a point of being photographed and making statements of inclusion, of welcoming. And he just has this beautiful line from a speech in 2016 that is really worth considering, being aware of, and perhaps praying over. And this is the tip of a large iceberg. And so, Pope Francis is deeply formed in our Catholic social teaching. And so he's coming out of that worldview, that lens. And so Mike and I envision our work is very much in line with the current Pope's vision for what Catholic schools are and can be as modes of evangelization and spreading the gospel in and through the world. So, the U.S. bishops are in line with the Pope, in line with our schools. There's a lot of momentum and a lot of energy that is supporting your efforts as teachers and administrators in schools to bring inclusive practices more prominent, more to the fore, more prominently into your schools. Yeah, I mean, misconceptions. And I think, my children are typically performing students in their school, but they have peers that are not, and they are receive special services. And so, I rub elbows with parents at the pickup line, pre-COVID at the pickup line. And we want to know, how does that impact my child? And I've been asked, hey, how are your children being impacted by the fact that your school provides these inclusive services? And it's an important question that I think parents need, and teachers and administrators need to be equipped to respond coherently and powerfully back. And, for my response, I'll foreshadow a little bit of what Mike will explain, but I think that it's been important for me as a parent to advocate for my school. And I think it's been great. So how do other students learn? What's the impact on them? What's the impact on the faculty? Yeah. And, what if the student's not ready himself or herself? That's a question that, how do we know that a parent advocating for their child is ready for a Catholic school, kind of stepping into that? And then teachers sometimes have that hesitant, I'm not trained for this, or I'm not ready for this. I think, what can we do to debunk those misconceptions that teachers aren't ready, that students aren't ready, or that typically performing students, their education will be somehow negatively impacted?
Yeah, this is a great place to start, because you gave us the entire, the theological and the ethical foundation of why this is the right thing to do. And we haven't said these words yet today, but I think if I'm a school administrator listening, I have to acknowledge that as a private school leader, I have a consumer-based model. And if I don't understand, yes, the theological implications of this, but there's also parents I have to be able to respond to. And I think you're spot on, because each of those things has at the root of it some misconceptions. So let's take those and sort of think about them in pieces. So misconception one that we thought we'd sort of describe here, and I gave it this cute title about we're not tilting at windmills. Max, I didn't drag Max down with me, I hope, when we started talking about this stuff. But the first, sort of misconception is this idea that inclusion itself, right, almost only counts in horseshoes and inclusion, because you really can't think about inclusion as just one thing. It's not that suit that fits all kids or schools or teachers. So your first sort of point is let's think about the kid with a disability. Is it fair to a kid with a disability to accept them into our Catholic schools? Well, let's think about that. To include them meaningfully, we need to make sure they're in the least restrictive environment for them to be successful. If you have a good core reading program in your school and it provides some additional resources for kids around reading, then if you have a kid with dyslexia, it's very likely they could be successful. If you think about sort of what is the overall goal of your school, how it fits within your parish, how I love the way you said, the school mission fits within, well, no, it's the Catholic mission and then the schools are in there, right? So what is our goal? Our goal of meaningful inclusion is that all the kids in my parish can come to my school. that if you are a Catholic kid in my diocese, that you have a place. So those things fit. And I will tell you, as a parent of a kid who has not yet been welcomed in their Catholic school, that we were trying to work through that right fit, that this isn't one size fits all. And each kid and each family are going to choose differently, but how wonderful if they have a place to go. And I think it's important that we think about that individual kid, because inclusion has these bonuses, right? It reduces the inequality that we as Catholics and Catholic social teaching stand against. It reduces the stigma of being a kid who's different, right? It reduces the sort of limited outcomes of separate education. As much as my field of special education will have some wins and some losses, when we educate kids with disabilities all by themselves, the outcomes just aren't as good, Max. Which leads to your sort of second question, which is like, well, what about other kids? And I love this from our one of our class ladies, MJ. She's got this. I'm not interested in competing. I hope we all win. And all right, call me Pollyannish, which, by the way, if you haven't seen, is a great movie. Go back and watch that, because I hope I have some of that mentality. But when we engage in inclusion, the criticism is like, hey, only kids with disabilities are going to benefit. My kid's not going to get as much out of it. Well, first of all, let's confirm the first thing. I mean, because if they're not benefiting, let's stop doing it, right? But it turns out, yeah, when we include kids with disabilities who are typically achieving peers, their math scores go up, their reading scores go up, their writing scores go up, social behavioral goes up. So that's part of being part of the body. Win. What about other kids? It's like this dirty little secret, Max. That shouldn't be a dirty, and it shouldn't be a secret. It turns out when teachers have kids with disabilities in their class and they embrace these different instructional practices, they have a wider instructional tolerance. They're able to meet the needs of more kids, because there's this myth of average, right? None of you out there, we all have Lake Wobegon at home, right? All of our kids are above average. Well, obviously not. And so it turns out when we engage in some of these really good instructional practices, just pick reading, for example, when we do structured literacy, the academic outcomes of all kids go up. The social outcomes come up. We have kids in our Catholic schools your kids. I mean, I love your kids, your 4 kids. When they're with my kid, they're playing with Jack. They're playing with Claire. We're all a little quirky, but so are yours, right? And that's what we do. We're just playing. We get the boys down playing Legos, the girls running around. That's really important that we develop that whole view. But also for educators, there's benefits. When we engage in these practices, we're able to meet the needs of more kids in our classrooms. That's more job satisfaction. Also, there's records of where teachers of kids with disabilities, initially reluctant, very, very understandable.
Right.
Once that kid is in the classroom, the principal comes back and is like, hey, maybe, we could take him out if you want. Whoa, that's my kid. What are you talking about? That's a complete change of the heart. I mean, in so many ways, that's the argument you made. And for families, the family that's sitting in your parish right now that has a kid with a disability that doesn't go to your school, I bet you that's not by choice. And if that family can feel included on Sunday, could also be included Monday through Friday, what would that mean to our community? I think that's important.
Absolutely.
Maybe to tie this back here, when I think about these misconceptions, Max, it's so important that we remember too, as we listen to this, that our view of disability will determine so much about the outcomes for kids. So if we view kids with disabilities, this is the language you were struggling with earlier. And again, I respect it, because it's hard to talk about. But if you view disability as less, as something is wrong, not just something's different, it's wrong, you pathologize, right? That's called a deficit perspective. And it puts us in a superior place over people who are different. But as my friend Dan's mom used to say to him, well, you're smarter than some, but not as smart as others, right? And isn't that true for all of us? We're faster than some, but not as fast as others. We're kinder than some, but not as kind as others. How do we remove a deficit perspective so we don't other and distance? Similarly, though, we have sort of the view of others. What is the value we each bring? I mean, you and I have talked a lot about Luke and I, your son, my godson, playing football, right? You value that I can throw a football pretty well, and I could teach Luke how to do that. Like, that's great, right? But I also could never teach him to run and turn as fast as he can. Luke is so quick. But culturally, we value each other in different roles. If I'm a soccer player who has dyslexia, does dyslexia come out a lot on the soccer field? I don't think it does. That's your field, your soccer. I don't think that comes out. So we've got to find these ways to value individuals for the strengths that they give. All the different parts of the body do different things. And we recognize that some of that comes out in how we treat each other. I was just sort of talking about the benefits that come out of this. But there's a sort of sociological perspective as well that tells us disability is totally socially constructed. I mean, think about that example of the kid who's playing soccer but has dyslexia. It doesn't impact them. We treat that individual very differently, whether or not they go to a remedial reading class or not when they're out playing soccer. And in fact, it turns out in society, when we do things that level the playing field, that allow us all to live up to our expectation. I'll give you a great universal design example. When's the last time, although I know it's COVID, when's the last time you went to a grocery store, Max? And I know that's a Friday morning ritual for you. And you opened the door to that grocery store. I would, I would bet, I would bet good money you haven't done it since you and I were 2, 3, 4, or 5. Because what happens when we get up to the door? It opens automatically, right?
Sure.
But what if I'm not a shopper? What if I'm just a person who's pushing a baby carriage? Would the door open for me too? Yes.
Absolutely.
What if I had a walker? Yes. What if there were 2 of us and one of us was supporting the other? Yes. Those universal supports can be applied in education as well. And they actually level the playing field in really nice ways by allowing kids to show what they know in a variety of different ways, to be able to remove barriers. Like if I have a kid who's struggling with typing, or handwriting, but I could use typing, struggling with spelling, but I could use word correct. These things, I mean, I don't know about you, but the last time I typed a paper, and we're pretty well published, there's a lot of little green and little red lines on that paper the first time I write it.
Sure.
And I go back and I use some of those tools. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just curious though. I think, what about the teachers who are asked to do so much? And I remember an increasingly long time ago, we just worked after school with students. And what do we tell teachers who are like, I got this. I've been doing this for decades. I meet after school with these students and I help them after school. And what can we offer them as far as resources and ideas, and how can we improve their teaching and their experience?
Yeah, boy, first of all, we say thank you, right? We say thank you to the dedication. Thank you to living the mission. I put in here this idea of a 4th sort of misconception. It was actually, I think, one of our shared favorite professors, Doc, who some people will immediately hear this and know who that is. But he used to say to me all the time, even after you graduate, good teaching, that's what you engage in these practices and it'll help everybody. I think the difference, there is the after school help, but so much of that meaningful learning happens in the place. And think about things we would never do anymore, Max. You know, the red birds and the blue birds and the dodo birds, right? Like we don't do that anymore for a variety of reasons, except one of the things we're both in pre-service teacher education. You know, I love to ask my students is homogeneous grouping the better way to go or heterogeneous grouping the better way to go? It's a total trick question. I get that, half the class this way and half the class that way. The answer is neither and both,
Right.
Because it's never do one all the time. It's heterogeneous grouping when I want to have model readers and practice readers. Like I've got that piece. It's homogeneous when I work on finite skill development. And then I go back and I do that practice. I think the biggest difference, and the research bears this out, the biggest difference between kids with disabilities and kids without disabilities is not what we teach them. I mean, there's no different way to learn how to read, Max. It's still going to require phonological awareness and vocabulary and reading. It's how we teach them those things, the amount of practice we provide. And so for that teacher after school, again, she's providing more practice. Awesome. Is there another way to get that into the day and for after school? Is there anybody who's not getting access to that stuff after school because it's a homework club and, mom and dad got to come get them early or something like that? And when teachers do those things, those good instructional practices, they're actually embracing sort of a wider instructional tolerance, able to meet the needs of more kids in their classes. And I think the last sort of piece here that I worked with a superintendent who, because of her audience, I won't say, but a dear, just loved woman who I respect. And we were talking one time and she said, I said something about, we need to make database decisions in classrooms, so how do we do that? And she was great. She was salty, golfer. That was sort of her passion on the weekends. And as part of her saltiness, she said to me, oh, Michael, Data is just becoming another 4-letter word I can use on the golf course. I was like, oh no, it's just a great line, but also I broke my heart because I was like, no, you get this, you get teachers, you get schools. Data that's meaningless, she's exactly right about. I'm talking about how do we actually monitor the progress of our kids over time to make sure they're not falling further behind. And then use that progress monitoring, that formative assessment data to make instructional decisions before it's too late. Nobody wants to get to the end of the unit or the end of the school year and say, as we've experienced, oh, well, it looks like you haven't grown in math and it's been another year, right?
Right.
That's sort of a challenge. I need to be quiet. I want to say thank you and let you know here's a great way to contact both of us. If you want to use the QR code, that'll take you right to the special issue. It's been there. Max, it's been a privilege. It's been fun. I hope you've enjoyed this as well as we've sort of taken our audience through this topic. Any final words for our friends?
Thank you. I mean, this is you taking time to participate in this conference, to listen to participating in what Mike and I do. You're moving your schools, your communities forward. And for all the children in your classes, all the future students in your classes, we thank you from them.